Ron Clayton couldn't focus on work. His mind kept replaying the shocking news he had received earlier about his wife, Nancy. The seemingly perfect life he cherished had come crashing down just hours ago. Bill Jacobs had delivered the news at the bar where Ron was nursing a beer. Bill, whom Ron considered a friend and respected colleague, told him that Nancy was cheating on him. Bill had overheard lab colleagues bragging about their encounters with her at a recent company party. Ron recalled that Nancy had been missing for a couple of hours at that event, only to return with a story about a tour of the lounge. Bill's revelation made that story seem false. Bill apologized and urged Ron not to do anything rash. Ron, though hurt, appreciated Bill's honesty and support. After Bill left, Ron continued to sip his beer, reflecting on his life. Ron felt physically below average, standing 5'7" and weighing 145 pounds. As the youngest of four, he was often teased as the runt and perceived as weak due to his mild temperament. His brothers, John and George, and his sister, Lisa, often mocked him and named Little Ronnie, while even his parents made him feel inadequate. His mother, June, would ask why he couldn't be like the other boys, to which Ron would reply that he was simply different. The only supportive family member was his grandfather, Mark, who had an extensive library. By age 12, Ron had read every book, including Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Recognizing Ron's exceptional intelligence, Mark arranged for him to take the Mensa test, where he scored 215, surpassing Einstein and Hawking. His acceptance into Mensa was celebrated with ice cream and cake, and Mark supported him with a top-of-the-line computer. Ron's father, Bob, criticized Mark for spoiling him, but Mark defended his support. Ron's unusual interest led to some awkward moments at school. During a discussion about Shakespeare, Ron responded in Klingon, saying, "To be or not to be," in English. The class was shocked, and his teacher, after class, reprimanded him and warned of a principal's visit if it happened again. Ron apologized and showed her a Klingon translation of Hamlet, which made the teacher smile but still asked him to stick with the original text. That afternoon, Ron faced teasing at home and got angry, using Klingon to declare, "Today is a good day to die." His siblings, unnerved, gave him a wide berth for weeks. Mark continued to support Ron by buying college-level textbooks and arranging for him to test out of high school. Dr. Williams, the local superintendent, administered the test, which Ron passed with flying colors. Impressed, Dr. Williams contacted MIT's admissions dean, who accepted Ron based on his exceptional record and IQ score. While Ron and Mark were thrilled, Ron's family reacted negatively. John questioned his attitude, George threatened him, and his parents were silent, with only Lisa giving him a strained farewell hug. Mark explained that Ron's intellect intimidated his family, making them feel inadequate. Despite this, Mark's pride and support remained unwavering. At 14, Ron began studying at MIT, making a few friends who weren't intimidated by his brilliance. Mark set up a fund for Ron's education and expenses, and Ron used his investing knowledge to build savings and buy a new car. Inspired by Stevenson, Ron started a research project for the physically challenged and explored Dr. Franklin Steiner's theories. By 18, he earned his first doctorate, and a year later, a second. He also achieved a black belt in karate. Despite his family's continued distance, Mark celebrated all of Ron's achievements. Ron then accepted a job offer from a major pharmaceutical company near his home. There, he met Nancy, a waitress who was charmed by his accomplishments. They started dating, fell in love, and she accepted his proposal, impressed by the large diamond ring he gave her. Mark was pleased with Ron's job and engagement, but suggested a prenuptial agreement to protect Ron's assets. Mark's lawyer prepared a fair agreement, which Ron presented to Nancy. She agreed to sign it, understanding its purpose. With the prenuptial agreement in place, Ron planned to graduate, marry Nancy, honeymoon in Hawaii, and start his new life with his job and wife. Mark bought a 2-story home with a full basement as a wedding present for Ron and Nancy. Despite Ron's offer to pay, Mark insisted it was a gift, knowing Ron wanted a basement lab. After receiving his second doctorate, Ron moved Nancy from her apartment, where she had little besides clothes and a scooter. They packed up and headed to their new home. Nancy was amazed by the house and its new furnishings, while Ron was pleased with the practical yet comfortable setup. They quickly settled in, with Ron promising to buy Nancy a car after their honeymoon in Hawaii. A few days later, Ron introduced Nancy to his family at his parents' house. Mark welcomed them warmly, hugging both Ron and Nancy. Ron's parents barely interacted with him beyond commenting on his weight. They welcomed Nancy warmly, though. Ron expressed disappointment at not hearing from them over the past few years, but his parents explained they had been too busy to send cards or keep in touch. Ron's brothers, George and John, appeared disheveled and unimpressed. They mocked Ron's academic achievements and made lewd comments about Nancy, which Mark intervened to stop. Mark was frustrated with their disrespect and pointed out their lack of ambition. Ron was surprised to learn his brothers were janitors and still living at home. Ron's mother informed him that Lisa had moved out, is studying to be a nurse, and provided her contact information. Ron shared that he had secured a job as a researcher, and Bob offered a brief, if insincere, congratulations. When Ron asked if they would attend the wedding, his mother assured him they would, though Ron was skeptical. Outside, Mark apologized for the family's behavior and offered to handle the situation. He reassured Ron that Lisa had matured and might be different from the rest of the family. After a final apology from Mark, Ron and Nancy drove home, where Ron called Lisa, who quickly agreed to visit. She arrived about 15 minutes later, carrying a casserole dish, a childhood favorite of Ron's. Lisa updated Ron on her life. She was studying to be a nurse and working part-time at the hospital, supported by a student loan and a fund from Grandpa. Ron mentioned his new job, starting after the honeymoon. Lisa explained that their parents had fallen on hard times after he left. The factory closure led to their father's janitorial job, and both brothers had lost football scholarships and were working with him. Lisa had left home to pursue nursing, with Grandpa's help for tuition, as she didn't want to do janitorial work. She reflected on the strained family dynamics, which Nancy understood. Lisa explained that after fixing up the basement for their brothers, their father and the boys became increasingly difficult. Lisa left because she couldn't stand the situation, and their mother, fearing financial instability, remained silent. Lisa didn't want to discuss it further, so Ron respected that. Lisa proposed going shopping for wedding items, and Nancy was enthusiastic, despite her limited budget. Ron offered his credit card with a caution. They spent the next day shopping, getting dresses, and enjoying a meal. Lisa later took Ron to get fitted for his tuxedo. During the outing, Lisa noticed Ron's nervousness, and they shared a moment of laughter about past pranks. Lisa admitted feeling jealous of Ron's intelligence and connection with Grandpa, but wanted to mend their relationship. They continued their conversation over a meal, with Lisa expressing happiness for Ron and Nancy. She mentioned dating someone but was not ready to discuss family issues. Ron offered support, and Lisa appreciated it. The wedding went smoothly for Ron and Nancy, with her sister as maid of honor and an old high school friend as best man. Mark walked Nancy down the aisle, and Ron kissed her as his wife for the first time, though he noticed a slightly bitter taste. The reception was pleasant overall, with Ron dancing with Nancy, his mother, and Lisa, while his brothers and father danced with Nancy. George and John approached Ron, with George making an inappropriate comment to Nancy. Ron remained calm, but firm, and George, sensing a change in Ron, backed off and left with John. Lisa reassured Ron, telling him to ignore their brothers. Bob and June also offered their congratulations, with Bob welcoming Nancy into the family. Mark expressed his pride and welcomed Nancy as well. Ron and Nancy then headed to their new home, planning to stay there overnight before departing for their honeymoon in Hawaii. Nancy giggled as Ron carried her over the threshold. Nancy eagerly led Ron to bed, where they undressed and shared passionate kisses. Despite Ron being smaller than his brothers, he was strong, and they quickly fell into an intimate embrace. He noticed the bitter taste in Nancy's mouth was gone, and she seemed unusually excited and loose. They had a long, loving session before falling asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, Ron awoke to Nancy giving him BJ, which ended in a kiss. He noted that her taste was the same as it had been at the wedding. What the hell? Ron asked himself. Did she give someone a BJ at the wedding? He said nothing, but filed it in the back of his mind. He had no desire to ruin their honeymoon after all. They enjoyed their Hawaiian honeymoon and returned to start their new routines. Ron set up a home lab for substance development, while Nancy expressed interest in a nursing degree. Ron supported her decision, offered to cover the $18,000 cost of a 2-year program, and promised to handle the paperwork. Nancy enrolled at Lisa's college and dedicated herself to her studies, including night classes and study sessions. Ron managed household chores and advanced his lab project, testing a new formula on himself with temporary improvements before moving on to animal testing. As Nancy's studies consumed her time, their bed activity declined, and she became more irritable. Ron, concerned, spoke with Lisa, who confirmed the nursing program's intensity and assured him that Nancy's behavior was likely due to stress. A few weeks later, at a company event, Ron noticed Nancy was missing. After searching, he found her with some coworkers who had given her a tour. That night, Nancy was unusually affectionate, but Ron noticed the same bitter taste in her mouth and an increase in lubrication, reminiscent of their wedding night. Confused, Ron wondered if something else was going on. Ron was devastated over the loss of his marriage and wondered about Nancy's infidelity. He called his grandfather, Mark, who invited him over to discuss the situation. Mark advised Ron to gather evidence for a potential divorce, suggesting they use a private investigator and wire the house for audio and video. He also asked if Ron had an extra key, which Ron provided. Mark recommended staying calm and not confronting Nancy until they had proof. Ron learned that Nancy's schedule was demanding, but Mark assured him that the truth would come out soon. Mark also suggested Ron spend more time with Lisa, noting she had matured since leaving home but didn't elaborate on what happened to her. Ron returned home, installed a small webcam in the master bedroom to monitor any suspicious activity, and prepared for the next steps. Ron went to his lab, checked the camera, and then focused on his project to distract himself. He noticed his latest formula for the test rats showed longer-lasting effects with no negative side effects. Deciding to test it on himself, he recorded his vitals, injected a small dose, and waited 45 minutes for the drug to take effect. Once he felt the familiar burn, he recorded his vitals again and found them stable. Changing into workout gear, he used the punching bag and noticed improved strength and endurance with increased muscle mass. After an hour of exercise, he checked his vitals once more and was satisfied with the results. He hoped this might be the breakthrough he needed, but decided to proceed cautiously. Ron quickly showered, locked his lab, and expected Nancy home in about half an hour, but she arrived 15 minutes early. He greeted her with a deep kiss and noticed her taste was normal. Surprised by his sudden affection, Nancy responded with a smile. Ron mentioned he missed her and suggested they review something other than her school material. He picked her up effortlessly and carried her upstairs. Once in the bedroom, he undressed and felt stronger than usual. Nancy began undressing, teasing him, while Ron was amazed by his increased strength. She noticed his change in demeanor but didn't comment on it. They kissed, and Ron prepared for work while Nancy made coffee and breakfast. They enjoyed a meal together, feeling as if things were back to the early days of their marriage. After complimenting her cooking and sharing a kiss, Ron left for the day, reminding her not to stay out too late studying. Later, Ron received a text from Mark. "Wired and ready to go. PI on the case." Ron replied, "Got it." After a productive day at work, Ron checked the lab computer to review the webcam footage. It recorded their intimate moments from the previous night, a brief clip of Nancy going to the bathroom and her BJ. To his surprise, the camera also captured Nancy, his father, and two brothers, entering the bedroom and undressing about 30 minutes after he left. In the footage, Nancy expressed reluctance about their plan, mentioning that Ron had seemed unusually different and stronger the night before. She revealed that he had had exceptional stamina and an increased size, which she initially thought was due to Viagra, but he claimed it was due to diet and exercise. Nancy plopped down on the bed as the three men removed their clothes. In the video, she said, "I'm not sure I can go through with this today." George responded with irritation, "Why the heck not?" "Things have changed," Nancy explained. John asked, "Changed how?" "I'm not entirely sure, but I think Ron might be suspicious," she said. Bob wanted to know more. "Suspicious of what?" George echoed. "Yeah, what are you talking about?" "You didn't see him last night," Nancy replied. "He acted completely different." John inquired, "Did you end up sleeping with him last night?" "We specifically told you to keep him away during the week." "I didn't have a choice," she explained. "He just picked me up and took me several times. Honestly, it was the best act I've ever had with him. I'm still a bit sore from last night." George was shocked. "What do you mean, took you? And you let him? You hoe! You're unbelievable." Bob raised his hand to interrupt. "Wait a minute," he said. "What do you mean by different, Nancy?" "He was like a more pleasant version of you guys," she said. "Stronger, more confident, and even his Johnson was bigger than usual. I thought maybe he took Viagra, but he said it was just diet and exercise." Bob noted, "He must be working on something in his lab. We need to find out what it is." Nancy shook her head. "You can't do that. His lab has multiple security doors, and any attempt to break in triggers an alert to him and the police." George asked, "Do you know what he's working on?" Nancy answered, "I have no idea." John asked, "So what happens to our plan to get you pregnant and make him think it's his child?" Nancy suggested, "I think we should pause that plan for now. I want to finish school and get settled first. Once I have a stable job with benefits, we can revisit it." George said, "I'm not waiting any longer." He turned to his father. Should we switch to plan B? Bob nodded. Nancy looked at them with concern. What do you mean? She inquired. If we can't mess with that spineless guy indirectly, we'll just deal with him directly, John replied. Write in the A repeatedly. We'll even record it, George chimed in. Let's see if he can keep his job after we send it to his boss and coworkers. The three men chuckled at this. You can't be serious, Nancy protested. Oh, we're dead serious, John asserted. And you're going to help us set it up. What? Nancy was shocked. You want me to help you so you can ape him in the A? Yeah, George said, but we won't be the ones doing it. We know a few big guys who'd be interested in someone like your husband. Trust me, they'll make little Ronnie scream for mercy, and you're going to help us make it happen. What if I refuse? She asked. Otherwise, we'll have to tell him about what happened on your wedding day, John threatened. About how it was our stuff dripping down your leg as you walked down the aisle, and how it was our stuff in your mouth when he kissed you. The three men chuckled at that. We'll even show him the video of you with all three of us, and the one where you're with both me and George at the same time. Do you think he'll want to touch you after seeing that? Nancy looked down, clearly ashamed. What about your grandfather? Nancy asked. He won't let you get away with this. Yeah, George acknowledged. He has the mortgage to our house. He could kick us out or even get us thrown in jail. Don't worry about him, Bob interjected. I'll handle it. George and John nodded in agreement. So, are you going to cooperate, or do we need to drag you down to a bad part of town and turn you into a pills-obsessed streetwalker? John asked harshly. Please, just don't hurt him, she pleaded. When are you planning to do this? Pretty soon, George replied. We'll let you know when. For now, keep acting like the perfect wife. We don't want him getting suspicious, okay? Nancy nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she said quietly. Good, George said sharply. Now, let's see how you handle this, he commanded, indicating she should attend to him. Nancy reluctantly complied, trying to prepare him. Get on with it, he ordered harshly. She obeyed, taking him into her mouth as the others readied themselves. Ron was disgusted by what he saw and felt like throwing up. After the men finished up, they got dressed and prepared to leave. As they were heading out, John shot a look at Nancy. Don't forget what we told you, he warned her, and make sure he doesn't get to you again this week if you know what's best for you. Once they were gone, Nancy sat alone, hiding her face in her hands and crying. Ron, observing the scene, saw her distress and felt compelled to act. As the video ended with her heading to the bathroom, he copied the footage onto a thumb drive. Realizing he had just seen a criminal plot, he pulled out his phone to call the police and alert Mark. Before he could make the call, his phone rang. Seeing it was Lisa, he answered immediately. Ron, thank God I reached you, Lisa said urgently. You need to come to the hospital right now. What's going on, Lisa? He asked, concerned. It's Grandpa, she replied. He's been shot. He's out of surgery, but his condition is critical. Please come quickly. I'll meet you in the ER. After ending the call, Ron rushed up the stairs, securing the lab doors as he went. He drove as fast as he could to the hospital and met Lisa in the emergency room. Grabbing his hand, she led him to the recovery area where Mark lay. Mark's eyes were shut, his breathing uneven, and he was connected to various tubes and monitors showing troubling vital signs. What happened? Ron asked Lisa. The police said he got caught in a drive-by shooting between two rival gangs, she explained. He was hit multiple times. The situation is really dire. Ron nodded, keeping a close watch on Mark's vitals. He took a seat next to Mark and Lisa, who rested her head on his shoulder, crying. He wrapped his arm around her, trying to offer comfort. Mark suddenly jolted in his bed. Ron and Lisa noticed his vital signs and realized he was having a heart attack. Almost immediately, an announcement for a code blue echoed through the room and medical staff rushed in. Ron and Lisa moved aside to give them space, but their efforts were in vain. Despite the tech's attempts, Mark's vital signs flatlined, and nothing could be done to revive him. A doctor checked Mark one final time and recorded his time of death. They disconnected him from the medical equipment and covered his face with a sheet before leaving the room. Ron knelt beside Mark, tears streaming down his face, while Lisa cried alongside him, her hand resting on Ron's shoulder. As Ron mourned for his grandfather, a deep rage began to consume him. His body shook with fury, and he felt an overwhelming urge for revenge. The anger built up inside him until he couldn't hold it anymore. He threw his head back and let out a gut-wrenching scream. Lisa recoiled in shock, and a few nurses rushed in to investigate, but Ron had calmed down by then. I need to get out of here, Ron said urgently. I'll call tomorrow. Lisa, frightened by his outburst, replied, Please do. She had never seen him like this and was deeply worried. Ron exited the area and met his father and brothers outside. "What happened?" Bob asked, confusion evident in his voice. Ron grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a nearby truck, his eyes blazing with hatred. "Do you really not know?" Ron demanded. Bob, taken aback, shook his head, having never seen Ron so aggressive before. "No, I don't," Bob said earnestly. "I swear I don't. If I find out you had anything to do with Grandpa's shooting, I swear I'll rip your balls off and feed them to the dogs," Ron growled, using a Klingon insult. Bob looked at his youngest son with fear and shook his head in denial. "No, please, Ron, I swear I had nothing to do with this," Bob pleaded. Ron let him fall to the ground and noticed George trying to take a swing at him out of the corner of his eye. Before George could land a hit, Ron knocked him out with a roundhouse kick to the side of his head. Turning his gaze to John, Ron's face was filled with fury. "Do you want to join the party too, jerk?" Ron growled. John's eyes widened in fear as he shook his head and held up his hands defensively. He was stunned by his younger brother's rage. "No, Ron, please, no more," John begged. "Then stay the hell away from me," Ron snapped. He looked back at Bob. "Are you going to handle your father's funeral arrangements, or do I need to take care of that too?" "I'll handle it," Bob replied, getting to his feet. "I'm really sorry, Ron. I know how much your grandfather meant to you. I'll take care of everything." "You'd better," Ron said, turning and walking away. He called his boss at work and asked for bereavement leave. "I'm really sorry, Ron," his boss responded. "Take the next 5 days off. We've got it covered." "Thanks, boss," Ron said, ending the call. Ron drove home, consumed with thoughts of revenge against those who wronged him. As he planned his next steps, he fine-tuned formulas and calculations, a task now second nature to him. Upon arriving home, he turned off the cameras and headed to his lab, where he quickly prepared a crucial concoction. He then set up a device resembling a turkey baster with his solution and waited for Nancy to return. When she arrived, he offered her a glass of sherry laced with the substance. As she drank, she suddenly became incapacitated, and Ron carried her upstairs. After undressing her and noting her physical state, he positioned her on the bed and used the baster to administer the solution into her body, absorbing any excess with towels. Satisfied with his work, he noted that the substance would keep her unconscious for 8 hours, while the solution would be absorbed in 6. He then retired to a futon in his lab to rest. Ron woke up at 6:30 a.m., showered, dressed, and made coffee. He then turned off all the security cameras in the house, leaving a note for Nancy about his early departure without mentioning Mark's death. He packed his laptop and a thumb drive with the video footage, then drove to Lisa's apartment. Upon arrival, Ron and Lisa had a brief conversation, with Ron preparing omelets and Lisa making coffee. After breakfast, Ron set up his laptop and played the video of Nancy with George, John, and their father. Lisa watched in shock and tears as the video ended. Ron then confronted Lisa about her past. She revealed that after he left home, she was abused by George, John, and later their father. The abuse began when she was drugged and manipulated during a basement incident. Lisa described frequent abuse over the following year and a half, accompanied by threats and blackmail. She satiated that their mother knew about the other girls, but not this. She was always out when it happened, and Dad told Lisa never to mention it to her. Ron suggested seeking legal advice, noting there might be no statute of limitations on such crimes. Lisa agreed to take the day off work to visit their grandfather's attorney, Marcus Billingham. Ron called Marcus, who requested they visit his office by 10 a.m. Lisa confirmed she could attend. They left for Marcus's office, with Ron planning to consult about both legal actions and their grandfather's will. When Ron and Lisa arrived at Marcus Billingham's office, he greeted them warmly, offering coffee, which they accepted. After settling in, Marcus explained the purpose of the meeting. He revealed that he had drafted Ron and Nancy's prenuptial agreement at their grandfather's request, which Ron confirmed he needed advice on for a divorce. Marcus then shifted the discussion to significant changes in their grandfather's will. Marcus disclosed that about 8 months prior, their grandfather had excluded their father and brothers from the will, leaving them only $1 each. Instead, Ron was named the new executor of the estate, which was placed in a trust with Ron and Lisa as the executive officers. Ron and Lisa were surprised by this information, having had no prior knowledge of the changes. Marcus explained that while the estate was substantial, the fees and final expenses would be covered, and they would be set for life. He offered to handle the probate court process, with the understanding that Ron and Lisa would make any final decisions. Marcus noted that their father might contest the will, but Ron agreed to let him handle the probate work, with Lisa also consenting. Marcus outlined the trust's contents: their grandfather's home, the house where Ron and Nancy lived, the property occupied by their parents, and a piece of lakefront property. He clarified that the lakefront property was intended as a summer vacation home, which Ron and Lisa might finish and use as a family getaway. Ron and Lisa discussed the terms of Mark's will with Marcus for another half hour before shifting topics. Ron asked Marcus for his opinion on a personal matter, and Lisa shared her troubling experiences with their father and brothers, which she had previously confided in Ron. Marcus took notes as Lisa spoke, then contemplated for a moment before responding. Marcus explained that their state had no statute of limitations for such crimes, though providing evidence would be crucial. He asked if Lisa had been informed about any video evidence, to which she confirmed. Marcus agreed to contact the district attorney to discuss the matter and suggested that someone from the DA's office would likely need to speak with Lisa. Lisa expressed her desire for justice, and Marcus assured her he would take steps to pursue the issue. Turning to Ron, Marcus took a thumb drive that Ron handed him. Ron wanted a divorce and explained that the drive contained a graphic video of Nancy with Ron's father and brothers. Marcus reviewed the video, then requested to keep the drive and promised to inform the district attorney. He would also begin divorce proceedings based on the prenuptial agreement and asked when Ron planned to confront Nancy. Ron said he would do it that evening when she returned from school. Marcus confirmed that adultery was grounds for divorce in the state and could even be prosecuted, though recent cases were rare. He noted that under the prenuptial agreement, Nancy would receive no support and would not claim the house, which was part of the grandfather's trust. Ron planned to provide Nancy with a check for her entitled amount and arrange for an apartment. He also mentioned she had her own car, which she could keep. Marcus appreciated Ron's generosity and agreed to prepare the paperwork, including a restraining order against Nancy and her associates. He requested Nancy's new address for service and asked Ron to provide any additional evidence. The divorce should be final in 6 months unless contested. Marcus assured Ron that the retainer was covered by the payment from Ron's grandfather, so he would send a bill later. Marcus handed Ron and Lisa his business card, signaling the end of their meeting. As they shook hands, Marcus expressed his condolences and reiterated that their grandfather had hoped for family reconciliation. He assured them that he would update them on his discussions with the district attorney and confirmed he had their contact information. Ron and Lisa then visited Alfred Johnson, a private investigator hired by Mark. After dealing with a receptionist, they were introduced to Alfred, who welcomed them and began discussing his findings. Alfred revealed that, according to his surveillance, Nancy had been with at least 15 men, including Ron's father and brothers, within the last 24 hours. He handed Ron a manila folder containing photos and a DVD with disturbing video evidence, including footage of Ron's father and brothers visiting the house that morning. Ron calculated that significant developments would occur around 3 p.m. and indicated that he had enough evidence for the divorce. Alfred agreed to continue surveillance until the end of the day and promised a full report in about 3 days. He mentioned that the surveillance was prepaid by Ron's grandfather, so there might be a refund. Ron informed Alfred of his grandfather's recent death and requested any refund be sent to him. Alfred expressed his condolences and promised to calculate the final bill and keep in touch. He also requested to be notified about the funeral to pay his respects. After their meeting with Marcus, Ron and Lisa went out for lunch to talk about what had happened. Lisa was surprised by how wealthy their grandfather had been, and Ron admitted he was still processing the news. Lisa asked what Ron planned to do next. Ron mentioned he wanted to rent a small, furnished studio apartment in her complex for Nancy. Lisa agreed to this and then asked Ron if he was really going through with the divorce. Ron confirmed he no longer trusted Nancy and no longer loved her. Lisa noticed how much Ron had changed, observing that the old Ron would have let Nancy walk all over him and would have felt guilty about taking action. The new Ron felt no remorse or guilt, even about what would happen to his father and brothers. Ron reflected on how the old him would have begged Nancy to come back, turning into a submissive figure. That version of him was gone, replaced by someone different. He knew he had to be cautious, as he could easily become like a modern-day Edward Hyde. Lisa raised concerns about their mother's future if their father and brothers faced legal trouble, or if they were evicted from the house. Ron was open to setting up a small trust fund for their mother and agreed it was a fair solution. After lunch, they went to Lisa's office, where Lisa introduced Ron to Marcia, the office manager. Ron arranged to rent a furnished studio apartment for Nancy, agreeing to pay 6 months' rent in advance. Marcia showed them the apartment, which was small but clean. Ron decided to take it and completed the paperwork, planning for Nancy to move in that night after school. After leaving the office, Ron and Lisa walked to her apartment. Lisa asked if he was sure about everything. Ron confirmed he was, stating that getting Nancy out was the best move, even though he had been tempted to make her live in her car. Lisa hoped he was doing the right thing and asked if she could stay in touch with Nancy to help her find a job. Ron agreed, saying she would need one soon. They hugged, with Lisa reassuring him things would be all right. Ron then went to the bank, where he removed Nancy from their joint account, canceled their joint credit card, applied for a new one in his name, and obtained a cashier's check for $5,450 in Nancy's name. Despite the high cost, he felt it was necessary. At home, Ron packed Nancy's clothes and toiletries into trash bags, placing them in the garage beside her scooter. He also packed their photos and wedding album into boxes. While packing, he received a call from Marcus. Marcus informed him that the district attorney was interested in pursuing the cases involving Ron and Lisa and would likely contact them for interviews. Ron thanked him and continued his work. By nearly 3 p.m., Ron had finished packing and then reviewed the morning's video footage. It showed Nancy, his father, John, and George in the master bedroom around 8:30 a.m. George had a visible bruise from the previous day. "What happened to you?" Nancy asked. "Your spineless husband did this to me yesterday at the hospital," George said. "I didn't know he knew martial arts." "Sorry, I must have forgotten to mention that," she replied. "He picked it up in college. Rest assured that little crap is going to pay for this, I swear," George said. "What's your plan?" she asked. George pulled out a Colt from his belt and waved it at her. "First, my friends are going to have their way with him, and then I'll blow his worthless head off," George declared. Nancy looked horrified. "No, please, you promised you wouldn't hurt him," she pleaded. "I never made any promises," he said. "Let's see if he can outrun a bullet." "You'll end up in prison," she warned. "And I don't give a damn," George snarled. "He owes me, and he's going to pay." "What were you doing at the hospital?" she asked. "Dad was shot yesterday," Bob said. "He died after the surgery." "Oh my God," Nancy said. "Ron didn't mention anything about that last night. Did you arrange it?" "No," Bob said. "It was pure chance. He got caught in a gang crossfire during a drive-by." "Lucky for us," John said. "Now we get the house and a big chunk of the inheritance money." Ron smirked at that. "Yeah, right, asshole," he thought. "Now, Ho, take off your clothes," George ordered. Nancy undressed, and soon all 4 of them were in bed, taking turns with her, filling her up. He fast-forwarded through this part, not interested in these scenes. Ron grinned wickedly. "Just wait, assholes," he thought. "The real fun is just beginning." After they finished and got dressed, Nancy asked George when his friends would take Ron. "Probably tomorrow afternoon after you leave for school," George said. "They'll follow him in a van, grab him, and take him to a spot by the lake. They'll have their way with him, then I'll shoot him. We'll dump his body in the lake." "I wish you wouldn't do this," Nancy said. "It's happening, and there's nothing you can do about it," John said. "Don't say anything or we'll tell the cops it was your idea." Nancy nodded, clearly uncomfortable. After they left, Nancy cried and then went to the bathroom to shower before school. Ron checked his vitals and body measurements, noting no significant changes from the previous day. He decided to wait until morning to take more of his concoction. Ron's phone rang. It was his mother. He answered, anticipating her news. She urgently asked him to meet her at the hospital where Dad and the boys were being taken. There was something wrong with their Johnsons, which had turned black. She had called 911, and Lisa was also on her way. Ron agreed to come after running a quick errand. After ending the call, Ron contacted the police department's homicide unit. He spoke to Detective Sparks, reporting a plot to commit ape and murder. He described what he had overheard and the current situation. The detective asked where the suspects were. Ron informed him they were on their way to the hospital, possibly undergoing surgery. The detective was interested in meeting Ron there to get a video of the plot. They agreed to meet, and Ron headed to the hospital. Ron hung up, laughing as he copied the incriminating videos to a thumb drive. He locked up and headed to the hospital with his laptop and thumb drive. After parking, he went to the emergency room where he was directed to the area where the 3 men were undergoing surgery. There, he saw Lisa, his mother, and a man in a cheap suit, accompanied by a uniformed officer. Ron greeted his mother, who was crying. She told him that the men were in surgery, and the doctor had said they needed amputations. Ron expressed his sympathy. Detective Sparks, the man in the suit, introduced himself and invited Ron to a nearby waiting area to discuss the case. Ron's mother asked what was happening, and he motioned for Lisa to join them. They sat down, and Ron plugged the thumb drive into his laptop. June and Lisa gasped at the sight of Nancy, with the three men on the video. Ron then played the video, ensuring Detective Sparks, his mother, and Lisa could all hear the audio. Ron fast-forwarded through the explicit parts of the video and stopped at the end where June saw the three men with Nancy. He played the segment where George and John discussed their plan, then handed the thumb drive to Detective Sparks. Sparks asked if Ron knew who else might be involved. Ron said he didn't, but they could be work or drinking buddies. When Sparks asked June if she knew about the plot, she shook her head and expressed anger. Sparks noted he hadn't seen any suspicious vans and guessed whatever was planned would probably happen in the morning. He said he needed to question Ron's wife, who was supposedly at school, and might offer her a plea deal. Ron said he was already divorcing her and had found her a studio apartment. Sparks said he'd talk to the district attorney and have Officer Green keep an eye on the men. He also mentioned needing to search Ron's home. Ron asked Sparks to look for another video related to his sister's past. Sparks was shocked, but agreed to check it out and promised to have officers watch Ron's neighborhood. As they spoke, they heard June's distress from down the hall. Lisa took her mother aside while Ron assured Sparks he'd handle things. Sparks then spoke briefly with June and Lisa before leaving, giving Ron a nod. About an hour later, the doctor came out of the operating room and approached June and Lisa. Ron joined them as they headed to a private conference room. "The surgery on your husband and two sons is complete," the doctor informed them. "We had to amputate almost all of their Johnsons because they were completely rotted. We might also need to remove their balls. They're in recovery now and will be there for about an hour before being moved to their rooms. They can still urinate, but they'll never be able to have closeness again. We'll keep them here for a few days to ensure the infection doesn't spread. Do you know what might have caused this?" "They slept with my wife shortly before we called 911, Ron explained. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "When was the last time you slept with her?" he asked. "Probably a day or two before this happened," Ron replied. "I haven't heard of bed activity causing this issue, but you should probably get tested for STDs, the doctor suggested. "We can perform those tests here if you'd like." "I think that's a good idea," Ron agreed. "The nurse will inform you of their room assignments," the doctor said as he prepared to leave. "We'll contact you if there are any complications." "Thank you, doctor," June said. As the doctor left, Ron saw him speak with a nurse. He caught fragments of their conversation, including the doctor asking, "4 more? Just like the first 3? And the nurse replying, "Yes, just like those other 3 men. They're currently in surgery." Ron smiled to himself. An hour later, Ron, June, and Lisa were led to 2 rooms where Bob, George, and John were recuperating. Entering the room holding George and Bob, they spotted Officer Green seated in the corridor between the rooms. Both men were handcuffed, with a nurse monitoring their vitals. "June," George tried to speak, but she interrupted him sharply. "Shut your mouth, you jerk," she snapped, startling the nurse. "I've seen the video of you 3 with Nancy. You're damn lucky the doctor removed your Johnsons. Otherwise, I would have. I'm going to make damn sure you all get what you deserve for what you planned for Ron and what you did to Lisa, you miserable bastards. And just so you know, I'm filing for divorce. It's overdue." She glared at George. "And you? I regret not aborting you when I could have. You revolt me. You're all dead to me, and I hope to never lay eyes on you again." "Mom, please," George tried again. "It's all his fault," he said, pointing at Ron. "That's total bullcrap," she retorted. "I've seen the video. I saw everything. I heard your plans for your brother. You're no longer my son, and I pray they sentence you to death." She spun around and stormed out to confront John. Ron grinned, watching the 2 men in their beds. "So," he taunted, "you plan to shoot me after having me aped. How's that panning out? Tell me, did you 3 really assault Lisa?" "Yeah, so what?" George barked, wincing with pain. "I warned you long ago that you were going to pay. And Lisa? She brought it on herself, flaunting those shorts. What else did she expect?" "You're actually blaming her for what you did?" Ron challenged. "Yeah, what are you going to do about it, punk?" George sneered. "We're not going to be locked up forever, you jerk. Just wait. When we get out, I'm coming for you and Lisa to finish what I started. I'm going to end you both." "Enough, George," Bob interjected. "No, let him keep going," Ron said. "I'm curious about how he thinks he's going to end us." "It'll be when you least expect it," George snarled. "You won't even see it coming, you pathetic fool." Ron chuckled. "At least I still have a Johnson," Ron shot back. He glanced around and noticed the nurse looking at them, shocked. "Did you get all that?" he asked her. She nodded affirmatively. "Yes, I heard everything," she confirmed. and I'd be glad to testify. She handed Ron a card with her contact information. I heard it too, a voice said from the door. Ron looked up to see Officer Green standing there, his imposing frame nearly filling the doorway, a stern look on his face. Ron nodded at him, then turned back to George, pulling an audio recorder from his pocket. He pressed play, and George's recorded threats filled the room. He entered John's room to find him restrained to his bed, just like George and Bob. Approaching John with a smirk, Ron taunted, "Listen up, jerk, your brother just spilled everything. 3 witnesses heard him, and it's all on tape. I'll make sure it lands right in the DA's hands. Oh, and the doctor might have to take your balls too. He mentioned you won't be able to have closeness anymore. Not that it'll matter much where you're headed. I hear your type doesn't fare too well behind bars." Officer Green and the nurse sniggered at that. "Enjoy your day," Ron quipped as he exited. At the hospital's coffee shop, Ron bought a latte for June, who looked distressed. She tearfully expressed her fears about losing everything due to her lack of income and skills. Ron asked her if she had ever truly loved him as a child. June was surprised by the question and assured him she did. She explained that his father had been overbearing and jealous, which affected her ability to show affection. When Ron asked if her husband had ever abused her, she admitted it had happened a few times, but felt she deserved it. Ron insisted she did not, and said the real trouble was with the 3 men upstairs. He revealed that he had audio proof of George's confession. June was unaware of Lisa's situation and was horrified by the news. Ron then told her that their grandfather had bought the mortgage on her house and put it in a trust, which Lisa and Ron now manage. He assured her she could stay in the house as long as she needed, with Lisa agreeing. Ron assured June that he and Lisa would help her set up a fund, manage her bills, and even cover her divorce costs. June, overwhelmed with tears, was deeply touched. She mentioned that Ron resembled her father, who had always clashed with Ron's father, which might explain the tension. June then asked about Nancy. Ron explained he was starting divorce proceedings and planned to kick her out that night, if she wasn't in jail. June expressed her regret and love for Ron, and he assured her he forgave her. They hugged before she left, and Lisa praised Ron for his kindness, offering to help with Grandpa's funeral arrangements. Ron agreed and said he'd need support as he prepared to deal with Nancy. Lisa promised to be there if needed. Ron arrived home and changed into shorts and a t-shirt. He placed his laptop and briefcase on the table. Expecting Nancy to be out until midnight or later, he was taken aback when he heard the garage door open around 11:30. "Home early, huh?" he remarked as she entered the house. "It's been a terrible day," she replied. "I just finished talking to the police. A detective kept grilling me about a scheme to ape and end you." "Really?" Ron said, his interest piqued. "I'm going to shower and then head to bed," she said. "No, you're not," he countered. "I've had a horrible day," she pleaded. "And it's about to get worse," he said. "Sit down." "I need to shower first," she insisted. "I said, sit your A down," Ron roared. "Right freaking now." Stunned, she slowly took a seat across from him. "I have a video I want you to see," he said, pulling up footage of her with his father and brothers. Her eyes widened in shock as she watched the video. "Oh God, no, please," she sobbed. "Watch it," he ordered. "All of it. There's more, including footage of you all plotting to ape and off me." "Please, Ron, I didn't want to do it," she begged. "What? Cheat on me or have me aped and ended?" Ron's rage was palpable. "None of it," she said. "Bullcrap, ho!" he snapped. "You slept with them the day we got married. Don't try to deny it. I was naive back then, but not anymore. How often did you do it with them?" "I don't know," she replied. "Mostly on weekdays after you left for work." "During our entire marriage?" he demanded. "Mostly over the last year," she admitted. "But I didn't want to hurt you. They said they had video of me and threatened to show it to you if I didn't sleep with them." "Video of what?" he asked. "Video of what happened on our wedding day," she answered, tears streaming down her face. "What about all the men you slept with at school?" he pressed. She looked stunned. "And at my company event? How many guys have you been with since we got married?" Her head dropped in shame. "I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe a few." "A few?" Ron challenged. "Are we talking 5, 10, 50, hundreds?" "God, no," she said. "Well, I have footage of you with at least 12 guys at school in a single day," he said. "Do you think I'm funding your education just so you can sleep with every guy on campus? I'm not an idiot, Nancy. Adding your 3 morning partners, that's 15 men in one day. Do the math, 75 in a school week, plus me and whoever else you're ducking." "I'm sorry," she said. "I just needed it to get through my classes. It's just an act. I never took anything away from you." "Just act? Never took anything from me?" Ron shot back. Are you out of your mind? I also noticed you never used protection. Were you trying to catch a disease to bring home to me or something? What the hell's wrong with you? Her tears stopped, and her expression hardened with anger. Fine, she said defiantly. I'll admit it. I enjoy getting ducked. You got that? I need it constantly. I love it when they did that inside me. I get off on having two Johnsons at once. Until recently, I never even felt you inside me. I was faking it all along. You're so freaking clueless. I only married you to escape the hellhole I was stuck in. So yes, I slept with a lot of guys, and I freaking loved every second of it. For the last 3 hours, I was at a club, getting ducked by 25 or 30 guys in a private room. I have a video of it if you want to see. Look at this. She lifted her dress, showing the white fluid dripping down her legs. Ron began laughing, wondering if his concoction had affected the tongues of the men. Maybe he thought it had even affected her rectum. What's so freaking funny? She demanded. You should be on your knees, crying like a doormat. You're nothing but a wimp, and don't even think about a divorce. I'll clean you out. I'm going to keep sleeping with anyone I want, maybe even in front of you. You dumb freaking hoe, Ron said. Her eyes widened at the insult. Yeah, I might have been naive and weak before, but that version of me is gone and he's never coming back. Trust me on that, cunt. Did the police tell you about my father and brothers? No, they didn't, she replied. Well, after they slept with you, their Johnsons ended up needing to be amputated, he said. It looks like you gave them such a bad case of rotten disease that it literally destroyed their Johnsons. I overheard a nurse and a doctor mention that 4 more guys suffered the same fate. Considering what you've told me, I'd bet another 25 or 30 men will also end up getting their tools cut off. Wait, what? She responded, stunned. There's no telling what kind of diseases you might be carrying now. Once people find out about this, I doubt any man will be willing to go near you. What did you do to me? She asked, panicked. Nothing, he lied. I didn't make you spread your legs. That's all on you, witch. Now you're dealing with the consequences. Regarding the divorce, I've already spoken to my lawyer and the paperwork is being prepared. Remember that prenuptial agreement you signed a couple of years ago? It's being enforced now. All your bank cards have been canceled and your belongings have been packed up. He dropped a key on the table with a tag showing the address. Here's the key to your new apartment. The address is on the tag. You're out of here, he said. A cashier's check followed. That's what you're entitled to according to the prenup. Spend it wisely. You'll probably need to find a job. Your tuition has been covered and my attorney knows your new address. Keep your car and scooter. Your phone will be shut off at the end of the month. Don't contest the divorce, or you might find yourself becoming an internet ex-geek star. You wouldn't dare, she shouted. Why not? He demanded. You admitted it yourself. You're obsessed with men. You're so hooked on it that you might end up making a career out of it until you're no longer desirable. That's assuming you don't catch something first. He yanked her hand and removed her wedding and engagement rings. Taking her purse, he pulled out her house key and bank cards. He handed the purse back to her. Now get out of my house, he ordered. She recoiled in shock, never having heard him speak to her like this before. She always thought he'd just give in to her. Please, she said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean it all. I'm sorry. I promise it won't happen again. I really do love you. He laughed derisively. Do you think this is like those bizarre stories online where men get off on watching their unfaithful wives? Do you really believe I'm that naive? He scoffed. Forget it. Everyone's already had their turn with you. By the way, why aren't you in jail? The DA gave me immunity if I testified against your father and brothers, she explained. I'm sorry, Ron. Can we at least be friends? I didn't want to hurt you. Friends? Do you think I want to be friends with someone who deceived me and plotted my harm? He snapped. I was nothing but a means to an end for you. You're even more foolish than I thought. I loathe you right now and never want to see your face again. Got it? Or should I draw you a picture? Yes, I understand, she said quietly. Can I still attend your grandfather's funeral? As long as you stay away from me, he said. Now pack up your stuff and get out. Now! She turned and headed for the door, struggling to get everything into her car. After she left, he changed the garage door code to block her out. Securing the house, he went to his lab. After Nancy's revelation, Ron anticipated the CDC would get involved, so he made sure to eliminate any trace of his work. He incinerated the serum, sterilized his equipment, and went to bed. The next morning, 3 men in dark suits rang his doorbell. They showed their CDC badges and asked for Nancy. Ron told them she no longer lived there and provided her new address. Relieved they didn't want to search his house, he glanced outside for any suspicious vehicles, but saw none. Ron made coffee and turned on the TV. The local news reported that about 40 men had undergone emergency surgery to remove their genitalia due to severe decay, with some also needing surgeries on their faces and tongues. They had relations with the same woman, and investigators were actively searching for her. Ron chuckled at the news, wondering about the number of married men involved and the fallout. A few minutes later, Lisa called. She mentioned taking Nancy to the ER because of severe burning sensations and lesions on her tongue and mouth. Nancy's condition seemed serious. Ron downplayed his involvement, claiming he hadn't done anything to her other than kicking her out. Lisa confirmed Nancy was still in the hospital and assured him the CDC would find her. After the call, Ron laughed, feeling satisfaction knowing Nancy would face consequences for her actions. Ron was concerned he might have missed something when creating the formula, possibly clouded by the potion he used on himself. He noticed a blue Ford van across the street, surrounded by police cruisers. Officers were leading 3 large men in handcuffs, dark, white, and Hispanic, to the cars. None were familiar to him. An officer at his door informed him that Detective Sparks had the suspects in custody and that there would be increased patrols in his neighborhood. Ron asked if he could drop off some audio for Detective Sparks, and the officer suggested calling first. After the officer left, Ron saw evidence being cataloged by another officer near the van. The officer listed the items found: bed paraphernalia, a taser, and a loaded tool, indicating the suspect's serious intentions. Ron was relieved and called the police station to deliver the audio of the suspect's confessions. Detective Sparks confirmed that the suspects were repeat offenders with substantial evidence against them. The Special Victims Unit was also handling his sister's case, with clear evidence of her being drugged, and the DA was determined to prosecute. In addition to everything else, Ron's father and brothers would be added to the offender registry. The rest of Ron's day was consumed with funeral arrangements for Mark. He discovered that his grandfather had prepaid for everything and arranged for a burial plot next to his grandmother, with a headstone already in place. Ron also secured a burial detail through the VA, learning that his grandfather had arranged for a flag to be given to him, which moved him deeply. At the funeral home, Ron was assured that all arrangements were in order, including a well-written obituary that listed Mark's descendants. The funeral director noted that Mark was well-respected and expected many notable attendees. After briefing Lisa, Ron relaxed at home. Lisa updated him on Nancy, who had undergone surgery and was in bad shape. Ron was indifferent to Nancy's condition, but Lisa reminded him she was still his wife and urged him not to let his anger turn him into a monster. Lisa also mentioned setting up an appointment for June with Marcus, and Ron agreed to cover the cost of her divorce. Lisa would have Nancy served at the hospital. After their call, Ron questioned whether he was becoming a monster, but accepted that the old him was gone. Ron spent some time in his lab, checking his vitals and body mass, and was pleased with the results. He decided not to take another dose that night, and instead changed into workout clothes, finding exercise helpful for clearing his mind. Mark's funeral went well, with several notable figures in attendance, including a retired U.S. senator and some representatives. Ron delivered a heartfelt eulogy and thanked everyone. At the graveside, overcome with grief, he sat alone by Mark's grave until Lisa joined him. She reassured him that Mark would always be in his heart and promised to be there for him. Lisa also updated Ron on their mother and the legal situation. June was sad but coping, while Marcus was filing divorce papers against their father and brothers, who were soon to be served. George was recovering from surgery. Nancy, currently in CDC isolation, wasn't able to attend the funeral. Ron planned to get some rest and accepted Lisa's invitation to dinner with her and their mother over the weekend. As they were leaving, Detective Sparks approached to offer his condolences and provide an update. The suspects were cooperating, and the evidence, including a stolen Colt and purchased toys, made the case strong. Ron asked about Lisa's case, and Detective Sparks assured him that the SVU had enough evidence to imprison the suspects for a long time. The DA was eager to make a strong case, especially with the election approaching. The next day at work, Ron's boss informed him that someone from the CDC was waiting for him. Ron cleaned up and went to meet Gordon, who greeted him warmly. Gordon revealed he had researched Ron's impressive background, including his high IQ, dual doctorates, and successful career. He wanted Ron's help with his wife's case, as the CDC had not yet found an explanation for her condition. Ron was skeptical but understood the CDC's concern about a potential public health risk. Gordon mentioned they had found no additional cases, but were keeping Nancy in isolation until they understood the situation better. Gordon informed Ron that the CDC would keep Nancy in isolation for as long as needed, which could be months or even years. Ron found the thought of her isolated with no contact amusing. Gordon proposed that Ron consult on the case since initial tests hadn't revealed much. He handed Ron a letter from his CEO authorizing him to consult part-time for up to 3 months, with compensation from both his company and the government. Ron agreed, but had a couple of concerns. He asked if his impending divorce from Nancy would be a conflict of interest, and noted that he wasn't a medical doctor, though he was skilled at analyzing test results. Gordon reassured him that his expertise was needed and that he'd have minimal patient contact. Ron agreed to start the next day, requesting a thorough analysis of Nancy's tests. Gordon promised to prioritize the tests and thanked Ron for his help. Despite his concerns, Ron was keen to verify if his solution had caused any lasting damage to Nancy. Ron informed his boss about the CDC consulting job, showing him the authorization letter. His boss approved it, noting it could benefit the company's image, and advised Ron to keep him updated without letting it interfere with his other work. That night, Ron reviewed the formula he used on Nancy, ensuring there should be no lasting effects, since it was designed to clear out in 24 hours. The next afternoon, Ron, in a protective suit, was led by Gordon into Nancy's room. Nancy recognized him through the visor and apologized, but Ron stated he was there to help the CDC understand what happened, not to hear apologies. Gordon confirmed that Nancy had gonorrhea and chlamydia, with HIV results pending. Ron requested all test results except DNA, which would arrive in a couple of days. He advised that another full panel test be done in a few weeks, given the STDs. Ron handed Nancy a legal pad and pen, asking her to list all the men she slept with in the past year, including any pills use. He needed as complete a diary of her activities as possible. Nancy agreed and began writing. Nancy asked when she could go home. Ron explained the CDC's concern that she might be carrying something contagious like Typhoid Mary. She was distressed, and Ron noted the destruction caused. Their marriage, his love, and 40 men rendered impotent. He told her to list all her recent partners and any pills use. Ron informed Gordon he needed to take the test results to his lab for further analysis. Gordon initially objected, but agreed to let Ron proceed after Ron threatened to end their arrangement. Back at his lab, Ron analyzed the results but found no evidence directly linked to his formula. He suspected an unknown issue and requested a PAP smear and endometrial biopsy from Gordon. Gordon provided the samples and Ron returned to his lab. After thorough analysis, Ron discovered a potentially new incurable strain of gonorrhea, which he dubbed super gonorrhea. Ron feared the infection Nancy had could spread without contact, similar to a case he heard about in Southeast Asia. A few weeks later, he showed Gordon his findings. A potentially new strain of gonorrhea that could take years to develop a treatment for, plus precancerous cells in Nancy's biopsies, indicating she might develop cervical cancer in a few years. Gordon asked what to do. Ron suggested isolating Nancy until a treatment is found. Gordon agreed and would inform his superiors. Ron then told Nancy the grim news. She had a mutated form of gonorrhea that could spread without contact. There's no cure yet, and she'll likely remain in isolation for an extended period. Nancy was distressed, expressing her frustration about being away from her classes and responsibilities. Ron told Nancy her student days were likely over due to a mutated gonorrhea strain and potential cervical cancer in a few years. She was devastated and pleaded for death, but Ron refused, promising to work towards a cure, even if it took years. Gordon then informed her she'd be moved to a more comfortable, secure facility with her belongings transferred and online classes arranged. Nancy asked if she'd ever have a normal life again, and Ron admitted he didn't know, but emphasized that staying faithful could have prevented this situation. "So explain to me, why?" he demanded. "Why did you cheat on our wedding day? Why keep cheating after that?" "Your father and brothers were very forceful," she replied. "I was drawn to how they dominated me and mocked you. It excited me. Later, they threatened to show you photos and videos unless I complied. Initially, I resisted, but over time it became thrilling. It turned into a twisted game. Then I started needing it more, even seeing guys at school during breaks. You know what happened next?" "Did you really mean what you said that last night?" he pressed. "In that moment, yes," she admitted. "But I didn't mean all of it. I just wanted to hurt you. I'm sorry." "You've said that before," Ron countered. "Does this mean you're really going through with the divorce?" she inquired. "Absolutely," he confirmed. She nodded in acceptance. I get it, she responded. Will I ever see you again? I highly doubt it, he answered, standing. I'll handle your belongings and your classes. I'll monitor your academic progress, but don't expect to see or hear from me again. Goodbye, Nancy. There was a time I loved you. It's a shame you ruined everything. Goodbye, Ron. Dr. Clayton, she said. He offered a small smile and exited the room. Outside, Gordon was waiting for him. Epilogue. Nancy's divorce went smoothly after the judge learned about her cheating scandal. Bob, George, and John were convicted of their crimes and sentenced to 35 years to life. George and John were found murdered in prison with "Dickless A-hole" carved into their chests. Bob later died by strangulation after a failed ending attempt. All three were cremated as no one claimed their bodies. June's divorce was finalized, and she was set up with a trust fund and financial guidance. 6 months later, she met and married a doctor introduced by Lisa. Ron wished him well at the wedding. Mark's estate probate took nearly a year, but Ron and Lisa inherited a significant sum. They decided to sell their childhood home after their mother remarried. Lisa married a nurse from her hospital, and they moved into Mark's old house. Ron completed his personal formula and ensured his company couldn't claim profits. He began searching for customers. Ron was cautious about releasing his formula publicly, but found a camp in North Idaho that specialized in helping men like him. After observing their burn the witch ceremony, in which a cheating wife was burned in effigy, he signed an exclusive contract with them. He never saw Nancy again, but was updated on her condition. She completed her online classes after 18 months, but stopped writing to Ron when he didn't respond. She developed cervical cancer 2 years later, had a hysterectomy, and endured rigorous treatment but survived and slowly recovered. Most of the mutated gonorrhea was cleared with the surgery and radiation. A new treatment for the strain was developed and FDA approved a year later. A year after his divorce, Ron attended a Star Trek convention in his town, dressed as a Klingon. There he met Belinda, a redhead also dressed as a Klingon. They conversed in Klingon, and Ron was impressed by her. They spent the rest of the convention together and started dating soon after. She had recently divorced a cheating brute who had been abusive. Like him, she boasted a genius-level IQ and was a member of Mensa. She worked as a researcher for an aerospace company and was on the lookout for a partner who was not only smart, but also physically strong. He opened up about his own past, mentioning he was seeking an intelligent woman who valued loyalty. I know all about being loyal, and just so you know, I'll castrate you if you ever cheat on me, she joked with a laugh. He grinned in response. Their evenings were filled with brain teasers and conversations in Klingon. Ron felt a happiness he never experienced with Nancy, and he fell deeply in love. One evening, he proposed to her, and to his delight, she not only said yes, but also insisted they make their relationship official immediately.